let me welcome our guest. And when I do it like this.
Ladies and gentlemen, this gentleman here is one of the phenomena of the world. He looks no older than Mr. Sean, and yet he is 2,000 years old. Is that true, sir?
Yes. You want to see my driver's license?
No, we have it authenticated. The Mayo Clinic has checked you out and said that you are 2,000.
Hello, Eric Breen.
A little south of 2,000.
A little south. Well, what are you going to do?
I'm here to make you look young.
That's right. Here to make me look young. Thank you for joining me. For those of you that don't know, I jumped on another channel. YouTube's full of them. I mean, there's guys talking about comic books probably right now. It might be even professionals for all I know. But I am a professional comic store owner. I have been for over 10 years. And Breen, you've been reading comics for how long? How many decades?
5.
5. Yeah, of course, it can get a little tricky on how that crosses over and whatnot. But it's a long time. You were there. You were there for first Galactus?
I was 4.
All right. Well,
started until
when were you reading comic books?
I started at 13. I was a baseball card kid before that.
No, okay, but you didn't have comics before then ever?
I remember picking up one at a drugstore in I think 1971.
Right.
And maybe another one along the way, but it wasn't really until 75 when I bought a couple comics at a baseball card show of all places.
Makes sense.
Yeah, in a strange way.
I can't tell you how many. I one of the comic stores I went to when I was a kid growing up was I'm Comics, I''M, and it was a baseball card and comic book store, but it was a decent comic book store.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those, and this was so long ago, and I still remember the 2 comics I bought were Amazing Spider-Man 31 and 34. And I doubt if I paid $1 for both of them.
Holy shit. Those are still Ditko, right?
Yes.
Like he's there till what, 36 or something
38.
like that? 38. Damn. So that was your back issue. A Steve Ditko comic.
My brother he'd gotten into comics for about 8 months and he moved on. I obviously didn't.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I know. So I've had comics usually I would buy the collections, those little digests that collect the first 6 issues of Spider-Man and so on. And then they also made the treasury size stuff. So I read a lot of stuff that way. But I noticed that a lot of the comics I actually got consecutive issue wise, whether I was super attentive or I don't know how I was because I'm barely now. And then, I was even more a butterfly. But yeah, I had consecutive issues around 79, 80. So I would have been 9 or 10 years old. So I got in pretty early. But even still, your first back issue gap fillers are things I have never owned usually. Anyway, why did I say Eric should come on the show? And I wanted to do it actually, but I just, I didn't know if I'd get around to it. Yesterday, I did an interview with a celebrity, a comic book writer, and I'm keeping it a secret for my patrons. It's going to be released first on Patreon in its entirety. There'll be some cleanups and stuff like that. But I regaled this person with a story because they are a fan of Avengers about this tweet that I responded to. And if you'll indulge me, this is a teaser for everybody for the YouTube interview that will happen, or an even longer interview for patrons of ours at Fantastic Comics on Patreon. See how I did that? It's pretty smart, huh? let me play a little bit for you. When you were reading comics as a kid growing up, just so I can, like, you know, judge you. Just joking. What were you reading at the time?
I was a big Avengers guy. That was kind of my jam.
Really?
And yeah, my formative period of that was the Jim Shooter, David Michelinie era. That kind of 160 to 200. That's kind. I mean, that's the earliest memories I have is reading those comics, and they really, those are the ones that really impacted me. I read other things too, obviously, but you know, that sort of George Perez, John Byrne, and then back to George Perez run is still the benchmark for me, and it's the thing that I've gone back to so many times just to try to dissect and figure out what was it about those books that had such a effect on me as a kid, and I still don't know, which means, you know, that's sort of a hallmark of a classic, I think, is if you can go back to it and still find things about it, discover things about it. I may never crack that code, but that was the big book for me.
When I got into Avengers, it was probably like around, well, I distinctly remember like the Quicksilver and the Rain with Scarlet Witch, you know, like in the 180s, 190s.
Yeah.
I had a I had a tweet experience with someone yesterday, and I just took exception a little bit to the fact that they said that Avengers number 200 was the worst professionally written book ever. And since you're a big Avengers fan and you've dealt with subjects that are, you know, that are out there for some people, how do you feel about Avengers number 200? Is it the worst professionally written book ever?
No, absolutely not. But it is one of the most misguided books when it comes to character and characterization. And I know the whole history about that issue, how I can't believe the decisions that were made and why they were made. I mean, who cares that there was an issue of What If that was similar? It's a fucking what if, you know, those issues, with rare exceptions, would come and go. So to derail what was probably one of Marvel's top books in deference to what was probably one of Marvel's lowest selling books, that I'll never understand at all.
And we're going to be talking about Avengers number 200. Are you an Avengers fan, Eric?
That was one of my two favorite books for years, I mean, like decades. And
you stuck with it forever, right?
Oh yeah. I think it was Jonathan Hickman was what finally, it was where I finally tapped out, but I was tapping out of new comics altogether by that time.
And that happens. I'm experiencing a lot of that right now. And it's not even really new comics necessarily. It's just new mainstream comics. But so many of the not mainstream comics are letting me down also. Like they're just not, it's just not like it was in the 90s, because, you know, a lot of people think, you know, striations and lines and horribly drawn feet. And, you know, some people think Sandman and, you know, other things like Vertigo. But there was still very cool things being produced that were truly independent, not Image independent. You know, a lot of people talk about indies today, and I really don't think Image is an indie. When you're the number 3 company, you're not an indie. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
How many movies have been The Walking Dead, you know? Robert Kirkman, the only person to rewrite history, and it was Kirkman was one of the original 7. And Walking Dead is the greatest thing ever.
I get where you're coming from. That for me, I go back and one decade prior. I read some indies and I like them, but they don't have the same I don't know what it's missing. The books from the 80s, because I was a huge fan of First Comics and Eclipse.
Star Slayer. I loved Kamiko. That was my
Trouble with Girls, Maze Agency, Elementals.
We don't talk about Trouble with Girls.
We don't.
If I got the right person who worked on the book. But I'm just joking. You can talk about Trouble with Girls all you want.
I think if I'm thinking the same person, there's a lot of stuff we can't talk about then, because he was very prolific.
Let me tell you, especially if you're reading Green Lantern.
Yes, we're talking about the same guy.
Green Lantern Mosaic. Everybody's like, oh, John Stewart. Green Lantern Mosaic was like amazing for John Stewart's character. Cully Hamner was young and like starving, trying to be a good artist, and it was just like a really good marriage. But yeah, POS. Anyway, we're going to talk about Avengers number 200. I'm going to try and do this correct for once. I'm going to take us to Mother's basement, and I'll do this, and lastly I will do this.
Here! I'm down here! Down here!
Mr. Sheldon?
That's right. We're going to go to Mother's basement, and we're going to talk Avengers. Let me just... I can't cue it all up. In fact, let's go here. Joe Corralo loves First Comics. I'm still waiting. Please tell me about it. John Sable. I was having a fucking hissy fit with Hero Fall. Hero Fall helps me out on Wednesdays and does a really good job. And maybe it's it's all my fault because, he's just doing what I recommended. But they're selling stuff cheap because it doesn't really matter. And then there's stuff that matters that's really cheap. And to him it was like, and I bet and this is not a bad thing. But it was like Zot, and people older than me would clutch their pearls if they heard something like that was going to be like basically put out for pennies. And so was I. I feel like since I got into comics early that I got out of mainstream, not entirely, but quickly. And it was anyway, that was something that was happening at the store this week. It was pretty hilarious. Let me get this up. I'm gonna share screen. I'm gonna turn off my face so because it's weird not being able to see the screen at the same time. So I'm gonna just pick my nose while I talk. You're welcome to do it on camera. I mean, whatever. So share screen. I haven't done this in a while this way. All right. So I wanted to give a first couple pages of the previous issue because I was never really a big Avengers fan, and I didn't even know who John Byrne or George Perez was at the time. But I was reading all these Avengers. I don't know. I think probably because of John Byrne mostly and George Perez secondly. I think they're the guys that I defend probably the most when it comes to especially the 80s and 90s. Maybe George Perez even longer. But these guys got me reading Avengers, and I totally remember this issue because of only one thing. At the end, they're like, Ms. Marvel's gone into labor. And the only way I understood labor at that time was, work. I didn't get it. I don't know why. I mean, I feel like I should have known that, but nonetheless, this whole last panel was like very mysterious to me. And I couldn't wait to read the 200th issue, and I had to wait forever. Just to let you know, like I read it when I was probably in the age to say like, well, I read Avengers Annual first, and then I read 200. Anyway, this is the 200th issue. Let me start off by asking you right away, Eric Breen. Did you ever win a Toys R Us shopping spree?
I didn't. And my parents didn't let me go on the Uncle Al show either, but that's another story.
Wait, what's Uncle Al?
That was the local kids show.
Oh yeah, what cartoons did they play?
They didn't. It was this weird guy who actually despised kids, but that's how he made his money. And I'm pretty sure he drank before the show. But it was all the parents would take their kids and it would get them out of their hair for a couple hours. And I remember
so it was like daycare, is what you're telling me.
It was daycare if daycare was televised. Wow. And if your birthday was that day, they'd make you the star of the show. And they did that with my sister, but it wasn't her birthday. My cousin bit him, so I can see why he hated kids. I mean, if that's I got bit by another kid today.
Well, supposedly Bob Hope hated "Thanks for the Memories," so but he sung it at the end of every performance. So that has to suck.
I was actually the butt of one of Bob Hope's jokes once.
What are you talking about?
He was the guest speaker at a luncheon our hotel was having, and I was serving the luncheon, and I slipped on something, wiped out, took a tray jack full of stuff, and it all landed on me. And I'm sure his joke had something to do with Jerry Lewis, because he leans over to the guy he was next to, and then they shared a laugh. I'm just assuming it had something to do with what I had just done. But he was a tiny little dude by then. Because when we were leading him out, he was like 4'8", it seemed like by then.
Bob Hope?
Yeah, he was. I think he was already.
So he was shrinking.
He was close to 90 by then.
Damn. He was like, I remember like watching a Carson show, because I stayed up late, and if he came on, it doesn't matter if like Johnny was talking to the governor, maybe even the president. But if Bob Hope came out, that show stopped on a dime for him to come on out. And that was the man.
Well, he and a lot of guys in it, they truly were larger than life.
All right. Speaking of larger than life, we've got this Avengers story. Did you read this when it first came out?
Yes.
1980, man. So there you go. I was 10. The writers. All right. So the plot is by everybody takes blame. Dan Green said, "Fuck you." The colorist is like, These days, colorists are like, "Can I get on the cover?" Shooter, Perez, Bob Layton, and David. Oh, so many pronunciations. Michelini.
That's what I go with.
McHoneyhay. They all are plotters, but David was the writer of this. So the interviewee that I was conducting yesterday said that, it's. I mean, I suggested it's more maligned under the light of today towards it. How we are about friends and stuff like that. But they said that it was, it was pretty panned also at the time. I mean, I imagine the Comics Journal was shitting all over it, but it's Marvel, so of course they would. George Perez is involved. Jim Shooter. All these people involved are like comic legends. David Michelini for the Venom times of Spider-Man and more. Bob Layton on Iron Man, George Perez and Jim Shooter. But this is a very much hated comic book. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I think I'm not gonna sit here and try to defend it as being some misunderstood, actually really good book. But I think now it's just become a thing to dump on this title, and people that have never read a page of it will sit there and tell you how bad it was. It's sort of like, at this point, if you mention like Hank Pym when he backhanded Jan in that issue of the Avengers, now they act like he, backhanded her, stood on top of her, stomped on her, punched her 10 more times. It just grows and grows. So this story has become just this hated. And again, it was not a great story, but
I mean, it may have been a great story. There were elements of these characters not totally behaving the way they do normally, but it was like a pretty extraordinary situation. Ms. Marvel being pregnant was something that happened like just a few minutes ago, basically.
It was a creative way to tell a really creepy story.
It was creepy, and I think maybe George Perez wasn't quite up to snuff to be able to portray it in that way. I could totally see how they would try and do something like they would sanitize it for sure. But if they tried to tell this story today, there would be a lot more emotion involved. And this is just trying to tell the entirety. This is an extra sized issue, but it's not going to go 6 issues.
I will wake up 6'8" before anything like this would be done in comics today.
Now see, I am going to defend it a little bit as far as its story. I think, I always thought like Steve Englehart was involved because, he's like reputed as being like one of those guys that sits down in front of the typewriter after smoking a J and types up his like Doctor Strange type weird fantasy stories, and it comes out pretty good usually. And this story really reminds me of some like far out science fiction thing. 1970s science fiction was pretty schlocky. And I guess, now that under the lens of everything, the 1980s and on, it's been pretty rapey also.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's
I was laughing to be uncomfortable.
Just to if you put 2022 standards to this story, that's a word. If you hadn't used it, I would have. But if you remember, I said this book had a quote unquote. Oh God, I realize. Okay, make your jokes here. Had a happy ending, but I think what happened was because obviously in those days we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the instant feedback, but the feedback came rolling in, and I'm guessing it wasn't very positive. So, if nothing else, if you want to make lemonades out of lemons, we got Avengers Annual 10, and there was Carol got a pretty cool arc next. Because I think when they did this, they were just writing her out of the universe for the time being. Because I think they'd run out of things to do with her.
Right. Well, again, I just feel like it reminds me of like the first time I kind of compared it to, in my interview, to like, kind of sort of Stranger in a Strange Land, where anything is being explored within this like sort of pseudo science fiction like world. And this storyline is like really crazy and it is creepy, but it also has an element of like Star Trek to it. And, it's just pushing the boundaries of a story and nobody said no. So what's going on right now is and this is Thor, Doc Banner and Jocasta are hanging out with Ms. Marvel, and they're like talking about how everything's been going like super quick, and they're worried about her feeling pain, but it's Ms. Marvel. I don't even know why that would be like such a big deal. Really? I mean, do you think like Ms. Marvel could like probably handle like giving birth pretty okay? In fact, superheroes probably can handle, especially like She-Hulk. She's not gonna like be all horrible, horrified during it, right?
Yeah, but this wasn't your average. This wasn't your average normal childbirth.
I guess that's true. A lot of this felt like dudes writing pregnancy, storyline, and it was kind of,
You said no one said no. Correct me if I'm not mistaken, but wasn't this when Shooter was also editor in chief?
I think his name was on it. Yeah.
Well, he wrote it.
Well, it's crazy because like, he was so anal about Dark Phoenix because she blew up that planet of plant people or whatever it was. And, she has to die, and it's like, no, come on. This is the crazy, weird sort of science fiction stuff that was popular probably like 10 years ago. And they're trying to like smoke a spliff and freaking write an awesome story. You know what I mean? I don't know if Jim Shooter was, but probably Michelini.
Yeah,
That's my guess.
I guess this just they didn't stick the landing because I'm a huge fan of Shooter's Avengers. Hell, he wrote what I consider the greatest Marvel story. I mean, I know I lose this argument, but Korvac Saga I put up against anything. And he
Korvac Saga is really good, yeah.
And well, the Dark Phoenix crowd and the Electra Saga people will come after me with their pitchforks. So
well, they're right, but I mean, I'm not suggesting that yours shouldn't be mentioned.
But that's kind of mine's more of like a personal preference because I am such a huge Avengers fan. So I mean, I will acknowledge that those other two.
I'd probably say the Kree Skrull War, if only because of the illustrators that worked on it back then. In fact, it's just a shame that John Buscema did an issue.
Well, you know the story behind that, right?
I go ahead and say it for the people at home.
Because I think we talked about it when we were eulogizing Neil Adams. He fell behind, and Roy Thomas was the writer and the editor at the time, and he needed those pages. And he knew that Neil wasn't going to get them, so he called John Buscema. John comes through. Then right when they're going to press, I think Neil turns in some pages, and Roy says, "Neil, I had to move on." And I believe that was the end of the Adams-Thomas collaborating. Yeah, because Neil did not take that well.
Well, Neil Adams and Barry Windsor Smith, who were on that book, they took their time. I mean, it took 30 years for Barry Windsor Smith to put that book out, that he did Monsters, which I'll order for people, by the way. All right, so what we have here, this is the part where like this would have been a really cool emotional scene, but basically we have all the Avengers hanging out outside the outside where Ms. Marvel is, where she's being inspected, and they're having a conversation, and Wasp is like really super excited that someone's having a baby. Scarlet Witch and the Vision just recently had kids. And everybody's kind of...
Well, they hadn't had them yet.
They hadn't had them yet. They're talking about it, is I guess what it is. So they're outside, and it almost looks like they're reacting to what's going on inside, but it's not. And the whole deal is like, Don Blake is like, go ahead and try pushing, or stop pushing. Oh, and she's like, I'm not pushing. And he's like, oh my God. I guess this kid's crawling out of her is basically what's happening. I could like maybe a Vault comic book. I could see this happening. Some weird treatise on pregnancy or something like that. I don't know. Everybody's like really super excited and happy. Beast is really jovial about all this. He's like later on he's going to be bringing toys for the kid and all this other junk. I'm just like really skipping over. Is there anything on this that you're like interested in talking about? I mean, it pretty much gets explained what goes on soon after this.
No, I'm good. I mean, you mentioned, I said the scene where the Beast is bringing all the sports equipment, and
Yeah, exactly.
the kid's already like a teenager in his mind.
Right. Yeah, it's only like scenes with Ms. Marvel where you get really like, well, at least initially, scenes with Ms. Marvel where you get like the story where you realize that this pregnancy wasn't something she expected, and that baby isn't her, and she doesn't even know who the father is, and all of a sudden, the tone, even though it was weird in the beginning, now it's like, what the F just happened? And then that's where we go to Vision and Scarlet Witch, and they're talking about junk. This is the reason why I'm not an Avengers fan. Like, I don't care about their problems ever.
Don't read the Stern run then.
Well, that was like it. Like when I was like almost gonna read Sandman, but I'm like more a Grendel guy, like I said, Kamiko. I gotta be, alternative in my reading. And Avengers just wasn't doing it for me anymore, if it was. And it's always because and I know, I freely admit that X-Men, which I loved, and Teen Titans, which I loved, were all about, the relationships of these characters with each other. The soap opera. I couldn't care when they freaking put it in the Avengers. I'm like, I want to see Thor and Iron Man and Captain America get together and kick some ass on some villains, and that's really it. So when they're like, Captain Marvel's talking about her father's gumbo, or whatever the hell it was they did in Louisiana, shrimp boat for he. Anyway, you can tell me I'm stupid for that. That's fine.
It's a matter of preference.
But
I always liked the interpersonal relationships. That's kind of thought that, but a good comic knows when to transition from that to what a superhero comic book is supposed to be. And eventually you're going to get a fight. Except for we really didn't get one in this anniversary.
Well,
issue.
actually, if I only had turned the page one more time, I could say, oh, that's not exactly true there, Eric.
I just corrected myself. I said, except for in this issue of all places.
This is the part, because now the kid is older, and it's just been a few minutes. And he actually says his first words really quick, and he says change, and then there's this interlude that occurs. And what is this that's going on? This is a New York subway, and this guy's coming up. And what is this, like an old Victorian, like kind of settlement or something?
Oh, because he's Immortus' son. I guess somehow he's causing some kind of flux that's making time go a little wonky. Because like I said, dinosaurs pop up and all kinds of weird things are going on.
So already we have Ms. Marvel, and she's like, all right, I'm ready to go. I'm out. And Wonder Man's trying to like warm up to her. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. He's trying to like trying to shrink her a bit.
Well, Simon had a thing for Carol.
Oh, did he now?
Oh yeah, going back to there's an issue where she's fighting Tyrak the Terrible, Atuma's right hand man, and Wonder Man's just watching this. She doesn't stand and strike a pose. She just hauls off and belts people, and he just kind of because at first since he'd been out of time in those 10 years, women's lib had started, and So he wasn't used to women being like that, or that's how they portrayed it in the comic because of the time period where it was. Obviously, wouldn't work today, but and he kind of had they kind of had a thing for each other.
So like it would have been like she would have hauled off, hit that person. Wonder Man's like, wow, that chick, and then she'd like pull some other lady in and like give her a big old lip lock or something like that.
But because there's that's a few years later. There's a scene
I'm just joking.
She like takes Wonder Man's chin in her hand and goes, "You're a little chauvinistic, but a hunk like you might be worth educating." So, again,
he is. He's all peacenik later on.
You got to remember the era. So the dialogue, if it seems kind of weird, it's if it had been 10 years earlier, it would have been a groovy hunk like you.
Now, a lot of people think like Avengers Beast, especially right now with Perez drawing it, then Byrne drawing it and whatnot. This is the beast of all beasts, but here he is just being a corny old dude, hardly a science guy, and he just wants to introduce this kid to all this sporting stuff, even though I don't think he was in the room when he said change the very first time. But this kid's up talking, he's not walking yet. He can't walk. He wants the Avengers to assemble these components so that he can explain himself properly. And Cap is grilling him, but kid's running around, in circles as far as Iron Man's willing to give in immediately. Like, yeah, it's no big deal. Let's just get this stuff for him and then we'll talk. Do you feel like this is a good portrayal of Iron Man or Beast? I think Cap is fine,
Okay.
He's wise to be, this kid's growing in front of them, and Iron Man, Tony Stark doesn't care. The Beast?
Okay, well, as far as the Beast, when he was in the Avengers, one thing they wanted to do is kind of change him from the intellectual of the X-Men to like more of an outgoing, humorous kind of person. Because whether it was overcompensating for the fact that he was blue and furry, but they did that, and it became a plot point a couple times where people forgot his science acumen, because when they were trying to figure out if Wonder Man was truly alive or not, Tony Stark brings in a biochemist, which is Hank's field, because he just kind of forgotten, because Hank just runs around acting like a buffoon all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in character. As far as Tony acting like that, I don't know. Again, we're trying to picture the world in which they live. You've seen some really crazy stuff, and you've had so much. Yeah, I guess maybe they're at the point where nothing really surprises them anymore.
Sounds good.
Best I got.
No, I like that. Second interlude. Now you're talking about dinosaurs. This lady's getting her mail. She faints, I guess, at the end. Hopefully she didn't get bit by like one of those this poisonous well, geez, there's an alligator right next to her. So something's going crazy with this New York area. I'm assuming it has to do with this kid as he's growing up. In fact, finally Carol agrees to meet her kid, and she's going downstairs, and I got to read this out loud. Okay, so this is probably like a good example. I mean, I really enjoy the writing. Even Carol Danvers herself doesn't know that. And so she steels herself, bracing for a resurgence of the loathing and humiliation she had felt before, waiting for the swell of fear and anger she knows will follow. But doesn't. For as she steps forward to face the slender young man who awaits her, she feels, instead of an odd sense of calm, along with an unexplainable and undeniable attraction. And dude says, "Hello, mother." This is probably like the turning point for everybody. I mean, everything has been like, all right, Janet's like overly into the pregnancy, and everybody's willing to accept that, you know, some weird shit's going on. But now in front of everybody, dude's like, "Hello, mother," and she's hot for him.
Okay, this is where I have to ask: creepier dude, this guy or Terry Long from the Teen Titans?
Terry Long, man, I hated that character. Oh
Everybody
my god,
hated that character.
everybody hated Terry Long. Someday we'll talk about that. Donna Troy, man, she got around. Good for her. But Terry Long, man, he should not. I guess that's a good first marriage for her. You know, like something to be like, I don't want to get married again. I'll just play the field going forward. Oh my god, what is going on? So even though like he's got her all like warm for him and everything, he's building this machine. We find out later what it is, right? But
Yeah.
it's just like, this is gonna let you know everything. That's what this is like going on.
It's basically something that's going to allow him to live outside of limbo.
I see. And then as this is all happening, New York is under attack, and it looks like Avengers Mansion too, or something like that. Everything's going on. We got spaceships and dinosaurs and biplanes and I don't know, space gliders.
I don't know why everybody was weirded out, because Marvel had the rights to Godzilla for like the 4 years prior to this. So they probably thought he was making a comeback.
Damn straight. So this is where we get our obligatory action. You know, the important heroes that could do something against this really super powerful threat within Avengers Mansion, potentially go out and fight. Right? Beast and Captain America, ground forces. Oh, look, we got we got Redskins, everybody. Redskins. And a Hawkeye. Oh, Hawkeye. We'll get to him later. Donald Blake is like, I don't need to be a doctor anymore, so I'll be Thor. And he starts fighting also. Finally, we get some Thor action. Even Jarvis gets into the action. He gets a big old slug in on this guy. Bravo, Jarvis.
Jarvis
Bravo.
punches somebody 2 issues in a row.
What was the other one? Was it next issue?
201. He confronts a neighborhood bully and boxes his ears in.
Holy cow. You know, Jarvis is far. I don't know, man. I would love to see a death fight between Jarvis and Alfred. What do you think?
They, before Tom killed him off, Alfred had pretty much been built up to the point to where it wouldn't even be a contest.
Oh, dude, he'll soliloquy, have a Shakespeare soliloquy as he's thumping your ass with his freaking Agent 13 skills or whatever he has.
Yeah, he acquired quite the backstory over the years.
Yeah, well, maybe Tony Stark bequeathed something to Jarvis that Alfred doesn't know about.
Well, he does. Yeah, he does know how to box. That's established. But you know, Alfred,
not Golden Gloves or anything, right?
Wow.
But
he uses the Marquis of Queensberry rules as he's punching out the bully. He mentions that.
There might be some kicking of shins involved then, I think, is what you're saying. All right, so Hawkeye comes in and he witnesses Marcus. He's like, call me Marcus. And he drains her, says, forgive me, mother, forgive me, my love. And then this is very within character as far as I'm concerned with Hawkeye. He comes in shooting. And he's like, well, you're holding Ms. Marvel. You're holding Carol. So I'll just fuck the machine up instead. And dude's like, he's crying. He's like, oh, no way. Oh hell. That's pretty within Hawkeye's that's what he does, right? He's a jerk that way, right?
In those days, yes. You could count on him pretty much to do the right thing, but you could also count on him to, like I said, shoot first and ask questions later.
So Marcus is pretty pissed off about this. But it doesn't go to action. In fact, he so this is where he explains everything to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, you go ahead. This is you telling me what's going on.
Okay, there's the 3 pages you asked me.
Yeah.
Okay, as near as I was able to figure it out.
This is a lot of reading, man.
Immortus was bored, so he wanted to have a mate. So he searched out and found a woman that was about to die, and he reached out. He came out of limbo, I guess, and saved her, brought her to limbo. They knocked boots, came up with Marcus the first time. And apparently at some point we found out that limbo, if you're not native to limbo, you can only last there for so long. And eventually she got propelled back into the real world. I don't know if it was to drown in that instant where she was, because eventually Immortus left and was killed off along with Kang in an issue of the Avengers. So Marcus decided he came up with an idea to escape himself. So he plucks Carol out of a plane, Jean Grey going into Jamaica Bay style, and brings her to limbo, and I guess impregnates her with himself, and then just puts her back on the plane a split second after he had taken her out.
Carol looks like she was enjoying things.
And indeedly do she did.
But it also looks like she wasn't with anybody also. Maybe.
No. But
it's just a weird mystical, nebulous creature that, like that Futurama where the Star Trek characters are stuck in the planet playing this guy's horrible movie or scripts. It beats being in a jar,
So now, I don't think this book ever explained how the pregnancy was only going to last like a day and a half, or how he, at what point after he did the deed did he cease to exist and be, get into her womb. I don't know. It's for FFS, as the kids say. There was a lot of talent involved with something that turned into something like this. That's all I got to say about that.
Well, I mean, there is a belief that, all right, so
it's clever. I mean, it's creative. It's like the 3 C's: clever, creative, creepy.
Right. Well, I mean, again, I just really feel that like explorative, freaky, sort of, pseudo sex, not even, I don't even know. Maybe overtly sexual. I feel science fiction, even more than other genres, a lot of times really explores things that, it's allowed, It's Clive Barker, part science fiction. I don't know what the fuck he's writing, but I know it's fucking kinky.
I think you're right. This has all the elements of a really whacked out sci-fi story that would probably work better, like watching Yellow Submarine if you're stoned.
Well, definitely. I mean,
seeing it with an established comic book character just seems kind of weird. I mean, if this were just like a fiction story and you could take out all the Avengers and just set the same kind of plot, it would be considered imaginative and probably not have quite the creep factor.
This is what they would have done if they were doing it for Pacific Comics, and nobody would have cared. If this was an issue of Warp, or if it was Star Slayer, nobody would have batted an eye probably.
That's fair.
But at the time in a Marvel comic, maybe now looking back at a Marvel comic, it gets a little weirder going forward. Just let everybody know it's not quite over. Oh, this issue, it's a fucking fuck you. Carol, who's like, she is the feminist of the Marvel universe, even in the 70s and 80s, right?
That's why the Miz was in front of the Marvel.
She's that's not my son. I don't know how he got there. Doesn't want to talk to him. Finally says okay to talking to him, and then he's like, oh my god, this is the dude. She throws that shit all away, and Thor's like, well, if you guys want to hang out, I can take you where you want to go. And then they do.
Yeah, he says during those 3 pages of endless monologuing that he didn't want to. He intimated that his dad had kind of coerced the feelings out of the woman that became his mom. And he said he didn't want to do that with her. But it's hard. That's a tough sell when you read these last couple pages.
Yeah, man. You're right. They're writing off this character and they're like, we don't got anything for. I don't know, man. Ms. Marvel, even when like Chris Claremont, like I love that Avengers Annual number 10. All right, so let's all right, so they're gone, and then shit happens, and then Hawkeye's holding her mask, Carol's mask, and he's like, I hope they live happily ever after. And that's how this issue ends. What do you think? Do you think that is the worst professionally written comic book ever?
Not even close.
Not even close. I agree.
Yeah, we've bandied this question around on the YouTubes on occasion, and one of the things because there are plenty of people writing comics today that couldn't have gotten a sniff when it was a merit-based industry. And they just write stuff worse than this on a monthly basis. So I kind of added a codicil to this. Worst comic by someone who has written good comics. Like for me, Exhibit A is Lois Lane #1, because Greg Rucka has an impressive body of work going back to the 20th century. And this, I said, for someone who's written as many good comics as Jim Shooter and David Michelinie, this one didn't work. I mean, like I said, it did its job, but I also don't think it deserves the seething hatred. And as I said earlier, there are plenty of people that have never read it that are the first ones shouting the loudest about how bad it is.
Have you been able to talk about this on Wes's channel or anything like that? I forget if you have or not.
We have not done a retrospective on this.
Awesome. So now you don't have to worry about that one. You can pass that one up. I'm so happy to have been able to talk with someone about this. And so what about the comic shop at the time? You were buying comics at this time.
This was off the rack.
This was off the rack.
Yeah, because I didn't find a comic book shop until early '82.
Did you have any friends that were reading this? Because I used to, at my school, the way we read comics was someone got one, who knows how, and then we're passing it to the next person. And so I read Daredevil. I shouldn't say I hate, but I was never a big Daredevil fan. But I've read a lot of Daredevil that way, because of those days. I've read Iron Man and Daredevil and Avengers and stuff like that, where I might not have at the time. But, I was more of a Justice League, Spider-Man kind of person.
Asking if I had any friends that were reading. Now, again, with no comic shop, it is, again, in these days, you didn't want to be caught dead reading comics. This was late 70s. I mean, it was, that was something. If you wanted to have friends in high school you hid that from them. That's just a fact.
That's
Now-
the difference between his age and mine. So
Yeah. Oh
in
yeah, a lot
1980,
changed.
where were you? What class were you in 1980?
Graduating senior.
See, I was like in 6th grade or something like that.
Now, I
5th
did have a
grade.
friend that read comics, and the way I met him was he lived like a block away, and a friend of mine, when he hit a ball into their window well when he was fishing it out, he saw the kids' comics in the basement, and he told me about it because I was friends with him too, and and he still picked on me. We were best friends, but anyway, so we rode the same bus to school, and I went up to him on the bus, and his last name was Pierre, and I said, "Hey Pierre, I hear you collect comic books." He thought I was going to beat him up. And this was like 1976 or 7. And we've been friends. We're friends to this day. I was the best man at his wedding.
Wait, shout out to who? A shout out to who? What's his name?
George Pierre.
George Pierre.
Yeah,
right.
he will never. I've tried to get him to watch these. Come on, he won't.
It's all right. You can clip it. I'll clip this part for you. 108, and we'll send it to him on his text messaging.